Welcome back to the Jewish Atlantic World Database. I'm Professor Laura Liebman. In the previous webinar, Why Gravestones?, we talked about what kinds of evidence gravestones provide and why scholars value them so much. In this webinar, we're going to dig a little bit deeper and think about the three main ways that scholars tend to analyze gravestones. Let's get started by looking at an actual gravestone. Here's one from 1716 from Curacao. When scholars look at this gravestone, they tend to look at three different things. First, the inscription. Other people tend to look at the images that are on the gravestone, and some people are more interested in the context in which the gravestone was found. First, let's talk about the inscriptions. Inscriptions can provide us with a lot of great biographical data that's important for both historians and genealogists. Inscriptions often tell us about the individual's name, sometimes including their father's name, or if it's a woman, the husband's name, or if it's a child, both parents' names. If the inscription has a large portion in Hebrew, it's important to read that too, because that is often the place where the family's names are mentioned. Individuals may also have the year that they died indicated, and they may tell us the age at death. Sometimes they even tell us how somebody died, for example, of a plague, or in an earthquake, or maybe in a slave uprising. Inscriptions can also tell us something about the individual's religious beliefs, though. This gravestone tells us in Hebrew that, and Mordecai came before the king. This is interesting because it tells us that the family valued Hebrew as a way of expression, and that it thought about the individual typologically. That is, they saw Mordecai, the figure from the book of Esther, as the prototype for understanding the life of the individual who just died. Though in this instance, the king might be a reference to God instead of the king found in the book of Esther. The second way that people tend to look at images depicted on stones is to think about what are the kinds of images that are found. When people look at images, they're often interested in doing so comparatively. So, for example, in New England cemeteries, for Protestant stones, people often thought about there being a shift from first death's heads, then to cherubs, and then to willows and urns. Dietz and Develson argue that this shift in images reflected a shift in New England theology from a concept of limited atonement, where very few were saved, the dowered death's head, to universal atonement, where more people were being saved. In contrast to those Protestant stones, though, the Jewish stones often combine both of these images of a death's head and angels. Very unusual in Protestant stones, though. I'll talk about why this is the case in an upcoming webinar. The third thing that people tend to think about is the context in which the individual stone is found. This stone was found in the Blenheim Cemetery in Curacao, that is in the older Jewish cemetery. But people would like to know, what were the other stones like in the cemetery? Is this typical of what is found or unique? This type of analysis usually involves analyzing the types of inscriptions and iconography used in stones in an entire cemetery or a section of the cemetery, and is called a seriation study. That is a chronological analysis of the stones based on change in continuity and material style. People who do seriation studies often compare one cemetery to another to determine whether the era, geography, religion, or ethnicity are behind the trends found in particular cemeteries. So here's an example from Dietz. He found in this particular New England cemetery from Stoneham, Massachusetts, that early on, all the stones were death's head, then some of them slowly shifted over to having cherubs, and finally, they ended up all being willows and urns. Importantly, in this example, these stones don't have all three, but rather these represent different stones in the cemetery during the same decade. As we add features to the database, we'll show you how you can download data to create your own seriation studies and begin to think about why there might be these changes over time, either within a family or cemetery or across cemeteries. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you have fun using the database.